Welcome to ArbChat, a virtual interview series featuring global thought leaders in international arbitration. My name is Sunita Advani, and today we have with us none other than distinguished arbitrator and leading counsel, respectively, Brenda Horrigan and Ravi Aswani. Brenda Horrigan is a prominent and internationally recognized arbitration practitioner with over 30 years of extensive global experience, having worked from the US, Paris, Moscow, Shanghai, Sydney, and now Singapore, where she is currently based. Prior to establishing her own practice in 2021, Brenda was the head of international arbitration in Australia at Herbert Smith Freehills' Sydney office. She commenced her career as a transactional lawyer and has spent nearly 20 years focusing exclusively on complex international commercial and investment treaty arbitration matters at both the arbitration and enforcement stages. Brenda is the immediate past president of the Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration, ACICA, and remains a member of its executive committee. She is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and is listed on the panels of numerous arbitral institutions. Brenda is consistently ranked in Chambers and in Global Arbitration Review's Who's Who Legal as a leading arbitration practitioner. Ravi Aswani is a leading commercial dispute resolution barrister at 36 Stone in London. He has a broad practice which covers a number of areas, including, in particular, shipping and international trade, commodities, energy, oil and gas, metals and mining, insurance and reinsurance, banking, and finance. Ravi has an extensive international arbitration practice, primarily as counsel, but also increasingly as arbitrator. He has been instructed in arbitration seated in a number of jurisdictions under a number of applicable laws, both ad hoc, in particular LMAA and UNCITRAL rules, as well as institutional arbitration, in particular ICC, LCIA, and SIEC. In addition, he is often instructed in commercial litigation in England. Ravi has been ranked for many years for his counsel practice in the Chambers and Partners UK and Global Guide, the Legal 500 UK Bar and Asia Pacific Guide, and Who's Who Legal. He is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and is a UK delegate to the ICC Global Commission on Arbitration and ADR. In recent years, Ravi has been shortlisted for and also awarded a number of prestigious awards in recognition of both the excellence of his legal practice and of his long-standing commitments to equality and diversity and mentoring. Before I begin with the first question, if anyone in the audience has any questions for Brenda and Ravi, please send them through via the Q&A function on Zoom. Now, coming to the first question. Brenda, what made you interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, specifically in the area of international arbitration? Was it perhaps an incident you witnessed or experienced yourself?
I think it was mostly, I have been very fortunate to work first in Europe with a European firm, and then in Asia with Herbert Smith Freehills, both of which had very strong female participation in the arbitration teams. And so I think we were in Europe at my former firm, we were frequently an all-female team, and this would have been in the early 2000s. And everyone else in the room was male, and then our team was female, and so it was just eye-opening, I think. And even when I was lead counsel, sometimes the tribunal would address everyone else in the room as Mr. So-and-so, and they would address me as Brenda, and it was just very annoying. So it's been a focus for a very long time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that's amazing that you're so committed to diversity. Now, Ravi, why is diversity important in international arbitration, and why should key decision makers be looking to promote diversity? What benefits does diversity bring, and have you seen these benefits yourself in the workplaces that you are or have been in?
Thanks for that question, Sunita. So I think broadly, this question can be answered by looking at two different strands of reasoning. which I'm going to call optimization and legitimacy. Dealing with optimization first, I think we're in 2023 now. It's probably a universal given now, accepted by everyone, that diverse groups produce better outcomes. And so however individually perceptive and brilliant people in a group may be, if they are all of a very homogeneous background, then it's been proven by study after study that that does increase the risks of collective blindness. And anyone who's interested in reading about this fascinating topic further, I thoroughly recommend to you a book called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. And he, in this book, very persuasively sets out why the cognitive diversity of any group is necessarily increased by demographic diversity. And he means diversity there in its broadest sense. Teams with an array of diverse experiences tend to have a richer, more nuanced understanding of their fellow human beings. And the hypothesis he puts forward and defends in this book is that diverse teams are able to genuinely work together and question their leaders to produce the best decisions. And he has a fantastic example of this, which I can't go into too much detail today because I know we have limited time and there's a lot to get through. But he very starkly says that he thinks the attacks of September 11 could have been avoided if the CIA's recruiting policy at the time did not result in a very, very homogenous group of recruits, all white, all male, all Anglo-Saxon, all Protestant Americans. And he expresses the view, and is backed up with interviews and other material he has, that that homogeneity set the CIA up for a big failure when it came to understanding the threat that Osama bin Laden posed. They just didn't understand how this disheveled man broadcasting from a cave in Afghanistan wearing very simple clothing under his combat fatigues could possibly present a threat to the greatest power in the world. They just couldn't believe it. He interviews an insider at the CIA and they said, well, we didn't take seriously this man squatting around a campfire. But they didn't understand the religious significance and cultural significance of the clothes Osama bin Laden was wearing and how he was modeling himself on the Prophet, really. And so as a result of all of this, they didn't really take Al-Qaeda seriously. It's incredible when you read this in the book, but apparently on the 9th of September, Osama bin Laden actually called his mother to say, in 2 days, you're going to hear big news and you won't be hearing from me for a while. And although that call was intercepted because they hadn't ever taken Al-Qaeda seriously, no resources were allocated to it. So it was actually 72 hours before that call was interpreted and analyzed. And if you're doing the maths, you'll realize that's the 12th of September, by which it was too late. And so just drawing all that together, he concludes that actually these attacks were a preventable tragedy. The CIA, however, were individually perceptive but collectively blind, to use his phrase, and that was due to a lack of diversity. If only they'd had a few more Muslim people on that team, if only they'd had a few more Arabic speakers on the team, if only they'd had a few more people with some cultural sensitivity and awareness. Now, that's a very extreme example, but I hope it illustrates the point to everyone that there can be a collective group issue if everybody has exactly the same background and brings that same background to the table for any exercises or tasks or cases in our case. So that's optimization. Legitimacy. I think this is more obviously apparent in investment arbitration, but the point applies in the same way to commercial as well. I think we have to take stock of where we've reached as an industry and ask the question, how long can we continue to have massive disputes with potentially quite a great national significance being decided, in effect, by 3 old white men from the global north who may never have set foot in the country where the facts of the underlying dispute arose? we're in a time now where we see increasing public concern about the perceived secrecy of international arbitration. Again, this is particularly clear in investment arbitration, but I do think it applies to commercial as well. And I think we have reached a stage as an industry where if we are to continue to survive and thrive, then we need to move with the times. Stakeholders are more naturally inclined, I would suggest, to accept decisions if they accept that the decision makers have understood all the nuances and not just the black and white of the contract. So really, Sunita, I would say it's those two things. It's the optimization and it's the legitimacy. I think that covers everything in your question. I know it's quite a long answer, so let's move on.
Thank you.
I would just jump in there to add that there's a similar argument as to the reason that Lehman Brothers failed was that they were not diverse enough. Again, too similar in background, too similar in thought processes.
That's amazing. I mean, that was truly eye-opening, Ravi and Brenda, and thank you for sharing that. Now, Brenda, you are female, and you bring this aspect of diversity to any workplace that you're in. Please share with us your own journey in navigating diversity in international arbitration and your lessons learned.
I think I'll just draw on a personal example, and I'll keep it short since we do have a lot to get through. But when I was working in Shanghai, my entire team was female. So our diversity target was actually a white male, because we had an Asian partner in the Beijing office, not in the Shanghai office. The entire Shanghai team was female. We had cultural diversity because we had people with French backgrounds, Chinese backgrounds, American backgrounds. We had everyone, all but one on the team, had spent time in multiple countries and had degrees from multiple jurisdictions, but we didn't have any men. And so, as Ravi says, it isn't just increasing the number of women or increasing the number of people with different cultural backgrounds. It's also making sure that you have that balance, and sometimes that means adding men.
That's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. Now, Ravi, please share with us a specific example of a time when you have advocated for diversity, equity, and inclusion in an international arbitration setting, or when you launched diversity initiatives within the arbitration industry or your workplace. What were the outcomes?
Thanks, Sunita. Okay, so I've got two examples which I hope are of interest here. The first is, as you mentioned earlier, a considerable part of my counsel practice is involved in shipping and shipping-related work. And as I'm sure some of the attendees will know, a lot of maritime arbitration ends up being ad hoc and dealt with by the LMAA. Who, along with all other stakeholders and institutions involved in arbitration, do appreciate the need for greater diversity. And certainly when I started, the average LMAA tribunal was particularly homogenous. I think I went many years as a barrister doing this kind of work before I saw a female arbitrator, for example, on a panel. But like everyone else, they're moving with the times. And as a barrister, I do occasionally have the opportunity to have an input into choice of arbitrator. And I was aware of someone, I won't embarrass her by naming her, who had recently given up her counsel practice. This is a few years back, and had wanted to focus on being an arbitrator. And so I suggested to a few solicitors who I worked well with when they were asking me. In particular, I think it was a case of a lot of things going and coinciding in terms of timing. That they were after someone who wasn't one of the usual suspects, who would perhaps bring a different level of insight into the disputes that came before her. And it's a funny story. I mean, she will tell you this story as well. But I did actually end up getting her first nomination as an arbitrator through this informal feedback to clients. And although that one I think didn't work out because there was some conflict issue, it did play a part, I think, in kickstarting her career as a full-time arbitrator. I can't take all the credit because she's very good and it's obviously all down to her. But I'd like to think I played a small part in getting her started, helping to increase her prominence. And now she's doing very, very well and doesn't need any such assistance from me. But it's fantastic because the feedback I've had about her when she has acted as arbitrator has actually been very, very good, and people have been very impressed when they've used her. So it does go to show that these little conversations which we have when people ask you for recommendations, people ask you about new people who may bring something slightly different to the mix, they do often go somewhere. It's not just idle chat. And the second initiative I had, I think this goes back to something which I may come back to later on, but I do strongly believe that all of us have an obligation in whatever way we can to leave our profession when we retire in a better condition than when we entered it. And some of the difficulties we have are not just difficulties which should be discussed, but it's something we should all try and, I think, do something about as and when we can. And one of the things I noticed when I started out was that senior barristers were very jealous of their own relationships with instructing solicitors. And although you might work with them on a case, they almost seemed, in some cases, I found, to go out of their way to try to keep you apart so that you didn't develop your own relationship with the solicitors and get your own work, which always struck me as very strange because as a barrister of 1, 2, 3 years call, I was not going to be competing for the same level of work as Silk of 25 or 30 years call. So I never quite understood it. But one of the things that I've tried to put in practice, and it has never resulted in any difficulties or problems, is trying to make sure I introduce my junior-most colleagues in chambers to solicitors I work with, to contacts I have in the industry. And it's very much a win-win scenario because it's not as if the solicitors would have come to me to work on a case which is pretty modest and not particularly complex, so very much suitable for someone who's starting out, but not really something which justified my instruction. And in a number of cases, people who I've introduced solicitors to in my chambers have ended up getting 1, 2, 3 sets of instructions and have been able in that way to develop their own relationship. And it's never reflected badly on me. If anything, solicitors always tell me, I'm so glad you introduced me to X or Y. They remember X or Y, but then they also remember me as well. So it's win-win all round. I think when we can help, we should.
That's really inspiring to hear your initiatives. And with that, Brenda, have you ever encountered any pushback or resistance to promoting diversity and inclusivity in international arbitration? And if so, how did you address it?
I think Ravi already touched on this briefly, but I would say that clearly the world is improving. So, 20, 30 years ago, it was a very different place than it is now. We have all the institutions that are now taking measures to promote diversity. We have greater awareness among the community of the need for diversity. The definition of diversity is expanding. All of those are very positive things. And I think we as an arbitral community are making significant strides. I think our biggest problem still is the clients themselves. So when we look to have lead counsel, when we look to have arbitral appointments, when we look to have significant speaking roles, the clients tend to go with known quantities. or tend to want to go with known quantities. And so, as if your counsel putting forth a proposed list of possible arbitrators, obviously you're putting diverse candidates, or you should be putting diverse candidates on that list, but the corporates will come back and say, well, my board knows Mr. X, so we have to go with Mr. X, because anyone else, if we lose, then it's my head that rolls. That's what the general counsel will say. And so it's educating corporates on quality diverse candidates and making those names more visible. And I think a lot of the things that are being done now with meet the arbitrator events, both for counsel and corporates, with circulation of lists of names, with arbitral women's list, with the real initiatives and the lists that they're putting together. All of that is aimed at increasing the visibility of people other than the long established candidates. And I think the more that we can be doing that, the better it will be for everyone. And part of that generational, because the younger generation is just much more open. Part of it is cultural. Some jurisdictions are still much more blokey than others. In some jurisdictions, you have to be a retired judge to get an appointment, and most of the judiciary is white men. So it takes time, but the more we can increase the visibility of diverse candidates, the more we can break that corporate barrier.
Thank you. Thank you for that insightful answer. Now, Ravi, can you offer any advice to junior lawyers looking to navigate diversity in international arbitration, and how they can make a positive impact in this area?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sunita. So I think the first thing is to perhaps change the narrative a little bit, and any facet of diversity which you have, I would say you need to start looking at that as a strength rather than a weakness. And strengths are things we should all develop, and to be brutally frank about it, not be ashamed about selling ourselves on the basis of it. Let's think about some concrete examples. I think linguistic skills are the best example. If you speak a language which is the language of a jurisdiction or a group of people who are increasingly becoming involved in disputes and arbitrations, this is something which you should be marketing yourself for. Obviously, there is a fine line to tread. You don't want to become known as a one-trick pony and suggest that your linguistic skills are compensating for your deficiencies as a lawyer. Obviously not. But these are things which, all things being equal, can sometimes be the difference between an instruction going down a particular route, whether it's to a firm or whether it's to a particular team within that firm. And so I always tell people, if you have anything that's slightly different on your CV or slightly out of the beaten track, slightly out of what we're used to seeing in the mainstream, then cultivate that, emphasize it, and use it as part of your positive marketing going forwards. I can give you this one insight, although I don't look at applications for pupillage to chambers anymore as part of the paper sift. It's dealt with by more junior barristers. I remember many years ago looking at these, and the top 10 to 20% of candidates, the way the English bar recruited, at least back then, were very, very homogenous on paper. It was almost like looking at an identikit CV. And I think part of that is the bar's fault, because back then we were portraying a very clear image of what the bar saw as the ideal candidate. But the flip side of that is that anyone with something slightly unusual on their CV really stood out like a sore thumb, and it became a conversation point at interviews. It became an icebreaker. Oh, I see you spent 6 months working for this charity, or working for the court as a judicial assistant, or did something slightly different. And like I've said, anything like that which distinguishes you from everybody else is a massive strength and not a weakness. And so within reason, we should all be trying to play to our strengths. And the other thing I would say is it's never too early to start developing a name and a personal brand. Now, obviously, the more junior you are, the more you have to tread carefully, but even then, I think it can still be done. Social media is a wonderful thing. I'm not here to advocate for any particular network, but as you will probably know, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and that is a great place where you can really start developing some traction, as long as you're posting with reasonable material and not too frequently, but not too infrequently. I mean, all these things that are details which I think you'll eventually find a balance on, but it's a very good thing to be involved with, just to increase your prominence and your name. And the final thing is, we've talked about
I think we have lost Ravi for a couple of seconds.
back. Are you back now?
Yeah, we can hear you
Yes.
now. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just saying, I think I'd finished on LinkedIn, and I was just, the last thing was institutions. Brenda has already mentioned how institutions are becoming much more aware and proactive about the need to increase diversity for a whole host of reasons. That translates particularly to the young branches, most of which are free to join. That, I think, is a very good thing to try to get involved with if you're a junior practitioner. Offer your services to your local branch, whether that's a local chartered institute branch, whether it's a very young arbitration practitioners branch in your city. There are others as well. And I do think that they are only too happy if you offer to help out at conferences, or to effectively help out with the website or articles in the newsletter, just curating things like that, helping out with their LinkedIn feed. These things are very, very gratefully accepted. And you never know, it's the beginning of a relationship, it's the beginning of your networking with your peers. And I've seen many, many times that journeys which begin with small steps like this do end up going somewhere special.
Thank you for that really great advice. That's something I'll definitely keep in mind, and I'm sure everybody watching will as well. Brenda, how can key decision makers such as employers, arbitrators, and arbitral institutions work to promote an inclusive and respectful culture for all international arbitration lawyers, regardless of their diverse backgrounds and experiences?
I think Ravi touched on a key component of this earlier in the context of a different answer, which is that those of us who are more senior need to be making sure that those who are with whom we work who are more junior are getting opportunities. And so whether it's allowing a junior lawyer to do a bit of the advocacy, whether it's allowing junior lawyers to sit in on client meetings and just hear how they go, taking them along to client sessions. For those of us who are arbitrators, working with juniors as tribunal secretaries, as assistants, or just mentoring. So I think that there's a lot that we can and should be doing to help those who are, more junior, of whatever background. men, women, ethnic, um, you know, financial diversity. It's all important, but the more we're giving people a leg up, the better it is for the community, and to be perfectly honest, for us as well, because you know, any help and assistance that a junior gives someone more senior helps the senior too. It's not just altruistic. So
thank you for that wonderful message to key decision makers. And this is, something that I have seen that you've practiced. You've certainly been an incredible mentor. So thank you. Now, I'd like to read out a list of hypothetical situations, and I'd be grateful if you could share with our audience, and in particular, the junior lawyers navigating diversity, some strategies for dealing with these situations. So the first situation, I'll put that to Brenda. You are a female associate working at a law firm, and one of the male partners at the firm treats you unfairly, and in particular, frequently belittles and berates you in front of colleagues and clients. He frequently undermines your suggestions in meetings, takes credit for your ideas, talks over you, and publicly humiliates you for your lack of experience. He frequently makes inappropriate and sexist comments about your appearance and abilities, including using expletives, leaving you feeling humiliated and degraded.
There's a lot packed into that question. I think first and foremost, stand up for yourself. If it can be difficult as a junior to tell a partner that they're behaving inappropriately, but saying, I'm sorry, please don't speak with me that way, is a nice, polite way to get your point across. And document, keep a journal or a record or something for yourself, so that if it continues, you can go to HR and point to specific instances of misbehavior. And I know, juniors often think that going to HR doesn't do any good, but I know of several partners who have been fired for this kind of behavior, even big rainmakers. And so it actually does make a difference. Also, reporting to HR means that there's a record. And the next, if the partner is doing it to one junior, they're probably doing it to more than one junior. And if there are reports from 2, 3, 4 people, that's much more powerful than a report, just kind of a bland report from one person. If you can find someone else, a different senior person who's supportive, and speak with them about this problem, because sometimes they'll be able to have a word with the person who's misbehaving and bring it to their attention, or they can speak to HR and emphasize the seriousness of what's going on. And sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself, and you might have to change firms. But sometimes standing up for yourself can be enough. I remember when I was a first year associate, and this was many years ago, when bullying was much less frowned upon than it is now. But one of the partners used to throw objects at people, and he would throw objects at everybody. It wasn't just the women, but he would throw objects at people. And he once threw a stapler at my head, and I threw it back at him. And I said, don't you ever do that again. And he didn't. He never threw anything at me again. He continued to throw things at other people, but he never threw anything at me again. And so sometimes I don't normally throw things, but sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself.
That really takes a lot of courage, and thank you very much for your wise words of advice. Now, Ravi, the next situation is, you are a junior lawyer at a firm. A fellow junior lawyer of a different race than you tampers with your wallet, which you placed in your bag while you're away from your desk. You complain to a partner who's of the same race as the other junior lawyer, but the partner does not believe you and instead sides with the other junior lawyer. When you raise it with the firm's internal ombudsman, who is also of the same race of the other junior lawyer, he thinks you are complaining about the other junior lawyer only because he or she and some other junior lawyers didn't invite you to lunch, and not because the incident actually happened.
Thanks, Sunita. So I think that the biggest takeaway I have from what Brenda just said is that you have to stand up for yourself. I would 100% endorse that. But what standing up for yourself means and what it looks like, it can be very different depending upon the nuances of the situation you find yourself in. Similarly, I would say the first thing to do in this scenario is to start keeping detailed records about this. That's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think it helps you get an accurate record of what actually happened at the time if you force yourself to reduce it into writing, because your memory of what happens a year after the event will be hazy. And I'm sure everyone on this call has done reading around the topic of how the memory of witnesses of fact in arbitration can become much worse with time. And without wanting to lie, as human beings, we naturally remember certain things with a greater degree of emphasis, and so can convince ourselves of a narrative which may not be quite how objectively it actually played out at the time. So it's a good discipline, I think, to reduce it into writing. Speak to HR, as Brenda has already mentioned on the first scenario. This may be happening to other people, and the act of reporting, when it becomes a series of reports from a number of individuals, can be much more powerful than a single report from one person. In this context and in this scenario, I would say find some different senior people, maybe of the same race as the other individuals, maybe of a different race, and just see what the take is from those people. I think if these various avenues don't provide any redress, then there are really two ways to go. And again, they both involve standing up for yourself, but that can't ever be looked at in the abstract. You've got to think how these things are going to play out. And as Brenda mentioned, sometimes you may have no alternative other than to change firms. And there is, I think, in this scenario that you've explained, Sunita, another alternative, which is perhaps take further action externally, report the firm to the regulator. Now, it's very easy to say in the abstract that that's something which you can do and should work. But I think everyone has to be mindful of the realities. Doing something like that is an extremely stressful and draining process. Do you really want it? Yes, from the perspective of standing up for yourself, it's on one view the right thing to do. But be mindful, that's going to be a drain on your life whilst it goes on. What's going to happen to you in the interim? Are you going to be given fair treatment at work? Are you going to be allocated to the top matters coming into the firm? Possibly not. So I would say if you're keen on staying at that firm, if you want to make change and make positive change and make sure that the next person coming in doesn't experience the same thing, there are options available to you. But I don't think anyone should ever go charging into the nuclear type options without having a clear idea of what that's going to mean. And frankly, sometimes we're becoming more aware now about the importance of looking after our own mental health and well-being. This may be a fight you just don't want, especially at a relatively early stage in your career. If you're genuinely not appreciated where you are, think about maybe moving to somewhere where you might be more appreciated. Certainly when I started, I'm sure this was the situation when Brenda started as well, it was relatively unheard of for people to move firms. And certainly at the bar, it was almost unheard of at all for anyone to ever move chambers in their career. Nowadays, this happens all the time. People work for 3, 4, 5 firms throughout their career. People move chambers. People change career paths slightly. There's no stigma about it anymore. And I think let's not all forget, we're all worthy individuals who have value to bring and who should be valued. And if you're really not getting that where you are, there are other options than going to the regulator and potentially spending 2 years of your life on that.
That's very valuable guidance. Thank you for sharing that. The next scenario is also, it's for Ravi to share with us his thought. You are a junior lawyer with a hearing impairment, which has never been an issue for you before. However, after joining a law firm, you notice you're being excluded from important meetings and are not being given the same opportunities as your colleagues. When you raise this with your supervising partner, he says that he thinks you're not capable of contributing effectively because of your hearing impairment.
Thanks for that, Sunita. I think this is one which is increasingly going to be seen in practice. Disability awareness and diversity around that demographic has certainly, since I've been involved in diversity initiatives and taken an interest, it's long been neglected, but it's becoming more of a prominent thing now. People are much more aware, and I'm sure everyone on the meeting will have seen of the ICC's recent task force and thinking about disability inclusion. So it's very much a hot topic. I would say the first thing to do is simply speak frankly with your supervising partner about this. Explain that this doesn't actually affect your work and ask for the opportunity to prove it. I would have thought, all things being equal, the issue here is simply a concern about the unknown rather than a conscious attempt to discriminate. And so I would have hoped that in 95% plus of cases where this sort of issue is raised, just speaking about it frankly, clearing the air, and reassuring about any concern will, I think, deal with it. In those very small minority of cases where this doesn't, for whatever reason, work, I think then you've put yourself in a better position if you've given the opportunity to at least try to redress it in this informal way. Then there are things that you can do, of course. Looking at this from a UK perspective, which is the jurisdiction I practice in, there are serious issues here. We have an Equality Act in England and Wales, and to me, the scenario you've read out, that looks like unlawful disability discrimination, probably direct discrimination, but at the very least indirect. But again, remember what I was saying on the scenario we just discussed. You can always take the nuclear option, but it's not the first option you should ever take. I would hope that this could be resolved by a quick informal discussion and reassurance. If that doesn't work, you can go further, speak to somebody else in a seniority role in the firm. It doesn't have to be your supervising partner. Again, the ultimate option of going to the regulator is there, but I would never say to anyone, go straight there. What you've described, I think it's just a question of a concern about the unknown. I think this could be sorted informally.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes sense. And now, Brenda, the next scenario is for you. You are a female associate who has been with a law firm for 7 years, and you recently gave birth to a baby. You decide to take the full 16-week parental leave that the firm offers to new mothers. When you return to work, you are assigned less important cases and are not given any new cases, which is affecting your ability to bring in business for the firm. When you raise this issue with your supervising partner, you are told that taking parental leave puts you behind your colleagues and that they had to pick up the slack while you were gone. You are also told that you are not as committed to your work as you used to be, and that they are worried that you might take more time off in the future.
I think this, in some ways, is similar to Ravi's assessment of the hearing impairment, although it should be more familiar to supervising partners. The first step here really is to sit down again with the supervising partner and say, look, I'm fully committed. I want to um, go back to, you know, full participation. Please give me a chance to prove myself. If that doesn't work, then it's very similar to what Ravi was saying. You know, speak with someone else who is in a senior position, maybe change teams. You know, find someone who will be supportive of your goals, and you know, again, just make yourself heard. But I think there's a more fundamental question here, which is something that we're starting to see and which is very, very important. And that is, we need to stop talking about maternity leave. Granted, you know, women give birth and they need time after birth to physically recover, but both parents of whatever gender should be taking parental leave or should be offered parental leave. And parental leave should not be a barrier for either gender to progression. And one of the things that I'm quite proud of is that the last associate that I sponsored for partner when I was still with the law firm was a man who was on parental leave when he was voted into the partnership. And so he was on, I think it was a 6-month or 9-month parental leave. It was serious time. And so I think that's the conversation we need to be moving towards, that parents need time with young kids, and we shouldn't be penalizing either gender for parents wanting time with young children, or elderly parents, or you know, ill children, ill parents. People need time for their families, and we shouldn't be penalizing them for it.
Yeah, that's really important, and thank you very much for sharing that. Now, the next scenario is also for Brenda to answer. You are an openly gay junior lawyer attending a networking event which you paid out of your own pocket to attend. As you mingle with other lawyers, you overhear several conversations in which the attendees make derogatory comments about the LGBTQ+ community, with one of the attendees saying that gays are, quote, too feminine to be real men, unquote. Some of the attendees openly express their discomfort with your sexuality and distance themselves from you. Others make inappropriate jokes or ask insensitive questions about your personal life. You try to engage in conversations and connect with people at the event, but are met with cold responses and dismissals. One senior lawyer even tells you that you will never make it in the legal profession if you continue to be so open about your sexuality.
Again, the last firm that I was with before I went independent was HSF, which has an openly gay global managing partner, and so my view might be a bit skewed, but the whole concept that you'll never make it in the legal profession if you're openly gay is just BS. You may not make it with those particular individuals, but you will make it in the legal profession. And I think one of the things that we're increasingly seeing with the focus on mental health is the need to be true to yourself. And being true to yourself includes being true to who you are, and you know, loving who you love. And that is an important part of just inclusion. And so I think there are, above all else, you need to be true to yourself. You'll be happier if you're true to yourself. If that means that you have to change firms, or heaven forbid, you know, change jurisdictions, because there are still some jurisdictions that are difficult, that may be what you need to do. But there are lots of places out there where this is not an issue.
That's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Ravi, the next scenario is for you. Your law firm has weekly Friday night drinks in the office, serving both alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. serves as an opportunity for informal discussion, getting to know colleagues better, and exchanging updates on current cases. Trainees are invited. Your trainee does not drink himself and has no issue with others drinking in his presence. He observes a holy day on Fridays, though, and likes to return home promptly on Friday evening. He confides in you that he is concerned that his non-attendance at Friday night drinks may affect his retention prospects and his career progression. Your firm has a pre-agreed line to deploy in this scenario, which you state in response, the effect of which is to seek to reassure him that absence or presence at this event is irrelevant in relation to retention or career progress. However, you form the clear impression that your trainee does not believe this, and frankly, you have serious misgivings about it yourself. Would the response be any different if your let's start with that scenario. And then would the response be any different if your trainee likes to return home promptly on Friday evening, because that is the day he collects his children from their after-school club and that family time is very important to him?
Thanks, Sunita. I think I can deal with the second part of that aspect very quickly, which is no, my answer would not be any different. And the reason for that is this question really highlights the difference between diversity and inclusion. And inclusion, which I'm going to speak about in a minute, it really cuts across everything. It's not limited to religion or culture or any one demographic of diversity, which we've been discussing. So what do I mean, difference between diversity and inclusion? Clearly, there is some degree of appreciation of diversity in this firm because the trainee has been recruited in the first place. But one of the things which you have to start thinking about when you move away from diversity for sake of diversity and inclusion is to make sure that everybody who becomes a member of the firm is given similar experience, similar opportunity, and a similar sense of belonging. This type of scenario, I'm familiar with it in England. It comes up quite a lot, for example, in my in-training, something like this scenario with the parameters slightly changed, but effectively the same scenario. And it highlights, or it often brings quite a passionate response from some people who think that the answer is you have to scrap Friday night drinks, and they're very much against that. But I don't think the answer is that you have to scrap Friday night drinks at all. You do need to think about what opportunities there are, though, for colleagues to mingle and exchange ideas and have discussions in this way. So without there necessarily being any right answer you can prescribe to everybody, there are, I think, a couple of things you can think about. Firstly, does this have to happen every week? And I'm not saying it shouldn't, but it may be that once a month would be more valued by everybody because they'd make more of an effort to attend, and you'd get a better turnout than if it was the default happening every week. The more important point is, though, I think there are other opportunities which would be equally straightforward to organize. We all need to eat. We all need snacks. So how about organizing some firm updates over breakfast or over lunch or just coffee in the morning or afternoon? It's not rocket science. But I do think that it requires a bit of thought to navigate an institution away from historically what may have been the norm and the only thing offered, just to having a bit more of a range, which means that anyone who, for example, wants to leave early on Friday for whatever reason is not disadvantaged because they could, for example, attend the monthly Tuesday lunch that the firm organizes or something similar. So I don't think it's about banning people from doing what they've always done by any means. I think it's just more a question of getting people to think in a slightly different way and what other things might be capable of being done without any real difficulty, which ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to become involved meaningfully in the day-to-day life of the firm. So this one, I think, is actually one of the easier ones.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really very interesting indeed. The next scenario is for you as well. So you are a junior lawyer from a family of means who is assigned to supervise a trainee. The trainee comes from a modest socioeconomic background. One day, the trainee comes to you and breaks down in tears, saying that earlier that week, a senior associate called him low class, and that his university degree was the equivalent of toilet paper because it wasn't as elite a university as his other colleagues. The trainee confides that he feels he does not belong and that he is not good enough for the practice of law.
Okay, so this one, there are some parallels, I think, here with the scenario we looked at on disability earlier on, in that socioeconomic diversity, a bit like disability, is a demographic of diversity which is not necessarily obvious from looking at someone. There are some facets of diversity which are pretty obvious if you're just looking at someone. Race, for example. Even then, there always, I would say, a risk of unconsciously stereotyping. But at least there is some physical sign in some cases that there may be diversity considerations to have. Now, disability and socioeconomic diversity are probably different in this respect because it may not necessarily be obvious that someone has a particular socioeconomic background. And I have to say, certainly in this jurisdiction, the bar is becoming much more aware of this type of demographic and the need to make sure that people are given an equal opportunity to become members of this profession, whatever background they have come from. Although the example might seem a little bit extreme, it's one I've seen and heard happening, and so it's quite pertinent, I think. I think in the scenario itself, the first thing to do is to reassure the trainee they've been recruited by the firm, and that will necessarily have involved a very stringent competitive recruitment process. So clearly, they are very, very good, otherwise they wouldn't have got as far as they have. And reassuring them of that is something which can sometimes get lost in our desire to press the nuclear button. But I think that's the first thing to do in this type of scenario. Secondly, I would say speak to someone more senior. I mean, looking at the dynamics here, it's a trainee, you are a junior lawyer, and it's a senior associate, so possibly someone of a similar standing or slightly more senior standing than yourself. I would speak to a partner, ideally someone not from Oxford or Cambridge. And let me be clear, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going to Oxford or Cambridge. But the idea that those two institutions or similar institutions elsewhere in the world are the exclusive gatekeepers of competent lawyers is totally out of step with modern thinking. And I think I would be very surprised if someone of partner level in a modern firm would subscribe to the senior associate's way of looking at the world. I suppose it could happen, but that I would say is very, very unlikely. And the partner and you should, I think, speak to this senior associate in question because his behavior is clearly not appropriate. And I think it's just out of step with modern thinking. It's out of step with the way we recruit in law firms these days. But also it's completely out of step with clients. I don't think clients think of things in these sorts of terms, really. And if nothing else, I mean, there are important things which we've put forward already from a diversity perspective. But if nothing else, just think, is the client going to tolerate behavior of this kind? They are not necessarily wed to any particular firm. It's a very competitive marketplace out there. And we can't have loose cannons like this senior associate in your example saying outrageous things like this because the clients will then just move their business elsewhere. So although that seems like a somewhat clinical way of looking at things, I do think it's not irrelevant to bear in mind after we consider the discrimination and the diversity aspects that also this doesn't make business sense. So the senior associate needs to be put in his or her place.
And I'd just jump in and add one tiny thing, which is in the interview lunch, if you have one, be aware that not everyone is maybe as multicultural as you are, and maybe not everyone knows how to use chopsticks. So, or whatever. Just because they don't have those experiences doesn't mean that they're not worthy.
That's very insightful, both Brenda and Ravi. And with that, we have now come to the end of our interview. And I'd like to thank both Brenda and Ravi very much for this fascinating discussion, and also to the audience for joining us today. Please join us for our next ArbChat interview, which will take place in March. So please keep a lookout on our LinkedIn page for details of that. And I just want to say thank you very much again to Ravi and Brenda for your time and very valuable words of advice.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sunita. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Take care.